Thank you for the opportunity to be on your podcast. I'm Jason Freeman. I'm the founder and CEO of Farmer Direct Organic Food, which is a company that sells certified organic and regenerative certified organic lentils, peas, beans, oats, and various other specialty crops. So through the process of photosynthesis, plants create sugars in their leaves. And they take those sugars and through their vascular system, take those sugars and transport them down to their root system. And then the roots exchange with the microorganisms in the soil sugar for micronutrients. Micronutrients are vitamins and minerals. So as this relation develops, the healthier the soil is, the more microorganisms, more life in the soil is, the more sugars the plants produce, because the more micronutrients the plants get from the soil, so the plants are healthier, and the more sugars this soil gets from the plants, so the microorganisms grow, and that community is very healthy. As simple as that. When you use synthetic fertilizers, specifically nitrogen, that bypasses that relationship. So the soil microorganisms, all that life in the soil starts to die off. When it dies off, because it's mostly carbon-based, that's released into the atmosphere, and it's taken out of that soil organic carbon cycle. People need to understand too, it's not like people talking about sequestering carbon, and it's not about like the carbon goes in the soil and it just stays there. It's not about that. It gets cycled through the atmosphere and back in the soil, and through the atmosphere and back in the soil. So although it's important that we transition off of fossil fuels, really a major benefit to the climate and the environment would be if we had a focus on soil. And it's starting to happen, but we need to have a much more of a focus on soil, and we can kind of solve or begin to solve some of these carbon issues.
Welcome to another episode of We Are Carbon. I'm Helen Fisher, and I'm in conversation with Jason Freeman, who you've just heard highlighting the significant roles of soil life in both moving carbon into the soil and transferring micronutrients to plants. Critical functions for ourselves and the planet that have suffered enormously due to our approaches of industrial farming. Jason is the founder of Farmer Direct Organic, and our discussion here is actually centred around his insights into supply chains, helping us take a view of some of the issues that the economies and relationships within our hugely scaled, centralised agricultural systems have created. Alongside, we shift to the considerations and approaches that his own business has explored in order to seek more transparent, fairer and healthier connections between organic, regenerative growers and consumers who are looking for the very best. I've designed and am introducing a new content structure for We Are Carbon, which acts as a kind of blueprint for exploring paths towards a regenerative society. So far, we've moved from soil to a farming transition, and now Jason helps us to continue with topic 3, which is from farm to fork, taking a look at the supply chains for food and their place within the wider picture of supporting regeneration. And I'm mindful that these topics become interwoven and not siloed, which is why we started with Jason's passion and concern for soil, to highlight that much of his motivation for transforming food supply is coming from his recognition of how important the way we farm is for the health and resilience of our planet. And to mirror the sentiments of many previous guests, Jason will now share of why all of this holds relevance for the health of people too, before we then continue with our full conversation together. I hope you enjoy.
The more consumers are educated too about the food they eat, they tend to start to make a switch toward organic food. And the reason is, if you look at the nutritional density of food since the 1950s, and the United States Department of Agriculture has been doing nutritional testing of food since the 1950s, carrots, tomatoes, things like that. And they've shown that since the 1950s, we've lost a tremendous amount of nutrients in our food. Food's getting less and less and less nutrient dense. When people start to realize that, and especially as they get older, or if they have children, they start to kind of think about these things and decide that, I'm going to make the switch to organic food, or I'm going to make the switch to some organic food. Not using the synthetic fertilizers creates that relationship, creates more life, creates more micronutrients in the plants, and therefore more micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals in the food that we eat. And I would like to point out too, when your body lacks the an appropriate amount of vitamins and minerals, it doesn't work properly. The immune system doesn't work properly, so therefore it can't protect the body. And it's just as simple as that. We eat more nutrient-dense food, we will be healthier. And I think most people understand that, or many people understand. It's a growing understanding.
Fantastic. This is a really great opportunity for us because the production of food and its impact on the planet and on people's health is a huge focus that we go through on this show from all different angles. So this is a really good opportunity for us to go through that from the supply chain and have a look how that can in fact impact and offer solutions to a lot of the issues that we're facing. That sort of point there you're making with the nutrition is huge, because that information that's being developed, that's being researched, that's really coming to the forefront of the science now, that ties the consumer with something that really punches. Like the idea that this is your multivitamin there in your carrot, or you could buy an inorganic carrot and have to go and spend more on the multivitamin anyway, because you're just not getting the nutrition that your body needs with the standard fruit and veg off the shelf today. And that's a massive motivation. I think that's wonderful. The relationship then that can be built back up, this organic life, the soil life, the whole ecosystem that goes into feeding the plants successfully, and that side by side sequesters, brings down the carbon, and it all kind of cycles round. Like you say, we shouldn't focus too much on what's being stored, but that it's actually in motion and then it's rebuilding, and that the nutrients are being moved. But all of this sounds really like the underlying fact is that organic and regenerative agriculture are being quite globally accepted in many circles as a wonderful solution to both health problems for people and health problems for the planet. And if that's the case, then I think what we should do is have a slight switch of focus, stay on the negative, stay on what are the problems we're dealing with, but look at a little bit more about the sort of economies of agriculture. And I'd really like to sort of rack your brains a little bit about, in what ways do you feel that subsidies and the structure around agriculture built into the economy is actually potentially a barrier for farmers to transition?
Oh yeah, it's a horrendous situation, and really led by the U.S. and Western European countries who are subsidizing conventional agriculture since World War II, and in the U.S. especially, they're subsidizing the major commodity crops, so corn and soy, and what? Yeah, it's a complicated subject. It's not too difficult to understand, though, in the sense that, okay, so we have these large multinational corporations. You can use Cargill as an example. Cargill trades a tremendous amount of corn around the world. This corn is subsidized. So what does that mean? What it means is that U.S. farmers are incentivized through these subsidies to keep growing corn, even though the market won't pay them their cost of production. So they're growing corn for below the cost of production. So then Cargill buys their corn for below the cost of production, and then the farmer gets a subsidy, a top up, so that with the subsidy, the growing of corn is profitable or somewhat profitable. It really favors massive farms. And this actually goes back to 1970s with U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, a man named Earl Butz, who famously said, "Yeah, go big or go home." Basically told farmers industrialize or get out of the game. And so, what does this do? So Cargill goes around the world with the subsidized corn, sell it into, say, for example, African countries, but they sell this corn into African countries for below the cost of production because it's subsidized. Meanwhile, the agricultural base in these African countries gets diluted because they can't compete against the subsidized corn. So these countries lose their capacity to grow their own food. The farmers lose the capacity to own their land. They get kicked off the land because they can't afford it because they're not making enough from their crops. All sorts of horrible, nasty things too. For example, along with this policy of corn subsidization, the U.S. government would go into countries to say, hey, forget about the millet, maybe these ecologically friendly crops that your farmers were growing, or say traditional crops, get rid of all that stuff. We're going to invest all this money into corn processing infrastructure. So not only does the U.S. government go in, or the multinational corporations go in with their subsidized corn, they have the help of the U.S. government to build all that corn processing infrastructure, which again pushes the local crops, the heritage crops from the area out of production because it's simply just cheaper. And when you have societies that are poor, they don't have much money, then they have to, they buy the cheapest food they can to feed their family. And this is all very commoditized, industrialized, nutrient deplete food. So it just creates this whole cavalcade of negative effects. And I say regenerative organic agriculture produces a cavalcade of positive effects. So all the way from the soil to the farmer's economic viability to the health of the country that the farmer's farming in and his community. It's a really messed up situation. And if one thing could happen to reform agriculture in the world and get us on a better track, it would be if the U.S. Got rid of their subsidies. It's so entrenched, though, and so political. I don't know how that's going to happen. So, but, how anything happens, it has to be larger social movements. There has to be consumers that stand up. There has to be politicians that are fearful of losing their seat in the Congress or the Senate or whatnot. So when's that going to happen? I don't know. There's been a lot of talk about subsidies, but it's still very on the fringe. The subsidies seem to be, entrenched right now. Another thing too is like people just have to, once they know what they're eating, they may not stop eating this garbage. So if they stop eating this garbage, stop eating all the subsidized corn, what shows up in all sorts of products, right? If you go to the center aisles of the store, it's wheat, corn, soy, canola, very few crops. You may have 100 different types of cereals with all beautiful different colors and sugars and whatnot. But it's still the same garbage. It's wheat, corn, and soy. And the corn and soy, the way they grow it is essentially animal feed. You're feeding it to humans on a mass scale too. And it's all genetically modified. And then we haven't even got into, which I'm sure we'll get into, the pesticide residues and whatnot, and what that does to the body and our health. So there's a cascade of negative effects, and then there's a cascade of positive effects. And, society is going to very soon have to choose which road we're going to go down.
It's a very big web, and I think that's the point that is making it so challenging. Is it's not for one person to step in and say this is the solution. It's a very connected and very established big system of, and it's feeding people. And I think that's sort of at the heart of everything. Is the last thing that anyone wants to do is propose a solution that maybe moves things in a direction that people cannot afford food or they cannot obtain enough food. So we have to be careful of so many different things in making change to an established system.
Yeah, and I am 100% against government mandates in that sense. And I'll tell you why. You're like, we're crazy. Government's got to do something. Government cannot force farmers to change their practices. Farmers need to voluntarily do it. And the reason I'm saying that is that, we look at Stalin era Soviet Union, we look at Maoist era China, and we look at those two groups, go, look what they did. Look what centralized agriculture did. It literally starved millions and millions of people to death. I think Under Stalin, it was 30 million. Russians and Ukrainians starved. Under Mao, it was about 60 million. Chinese starved. So we kind of have this smug perspective in the West that, well, we're just great. Our system of agriculture is feeding all these people. But make no mistake about it, it's a centralized system. And this centralized system, while it has provided abundance, it's provided abundance of nutrient depleted food. So instead of people starving, people are literally dying of curable chronic diseases, whether it's cancer, heart disease, and millions, hundreds of millions of people are dying of these diseases because of centralized agriculture, because of these agricultural policies that were put in place about 40 years ago, or, I guess longer, shortly after World War II, and really picked up steam in the 1970s. The rates of chronic disease have skyrocketed. So people didn't starve, but millions of people died of these preventable chronic diseases, a big part because of the food we're eating. Problem is, if the government goes in and says, well, look, this is a crazy situation. We can't do this anymore. Okay, farmers, you got to start farming this way. Well, then we're going to have the same issue as maybe they had in Stalinist Russia or Maoist China, where people do starve because the government's forcing farmers to change too rapidly. They don't know how to do the transition well. The yields plummet, things like that, right? So it really has to be a social cultural movement where farmers start to voluntarily change because they see their neighbor did. They ask their neighbor, well, how did you do this or do that? There needs to be a lot more collaboration between farmers. And we've seen this in the organic community. And when that happens, you have a successful transition. You have farmers that made the decision, and it's scary, right? Because like you're a farmer and you inherited the farm from your parents, let's say. They farmed with chemicals, you're farming with chemicals. You got the universities, you got the chemical companies telling you what to do or helping you out with advice. You have all this massive infrastructure, and for a farmer to say, you know what, I'm turning my back on that, I'm rejecting that, I'm going to go in a different direction, it's scary. But the ones that do it, make the decision, talk with their neighbors, educate themselves, they have a lot of success. So I was just on a conference call, for example, yesterday, and someone was giving a presentation just about the economics of organic agriculture. And organic farmers in the Midwest and Great Plains in the U.S., they net double income per acre than conventional farmers. It was 2.5 times more income from like net income, right? Like after all your costs and everything, it was 2.5 times more than conventional farmers made per acre. So that's proofs in the pudding. That is success, and that's where I'd like to see farmers able to go. So yeah, it has to be a change, one farmer at a time, but a cultural change. And then there'll be a lot of momentum, and we'll see that change really, I think, take over agriculture. I can't see how in 50 years' time we're still farming with chemicals like we are now. The soil's just getting trashed. The food has no nutrients in it. People are getting sick. You have these subsidies that we talked about, the dumping of cheap corn into countries around the world, affecting their ability to produce their own food. So at a certain point in time, people are going to realize that, no, this is wrong. We need to change. And what we're seeing right now with organic and regenerative agriculture is the seed of that. In the United States, about 6% of the 5% of the land base is organic, but that's 5% more than it was 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. So it's happening. And what farmers really need is consumers to educate themselves about these subjects and really embrace organic agriculture. And when you're looking at organic and conventional food, you're not comparing apples to apples. You're comparing apples to oranges, or I say apples to rocks. Okay, you're paying for an apple when you buy something organic because it actually has nutrients into it. It's not the same thing as that rock you're buying that looks like an apple, but it doesn't really have much nutrients in it. So it's completely two different things. And like you said, Okay, so you're buying the cheaper food. You don't want to spend money on organic food, but then you're taking the vitamins and the supplements, and then you're also maybe getting sick and missing time off work. And then you have to go to the doctor's appointment. You got to take your kid to the doctor's appointment. Your spouse has to go to the doctor's appointment. Is it like, so how much does that actually cost? If people really looked at their time and money by being sick, how much does that cost? And just me, myself personally, I don't know the last time I caught a cold. I literally can't remember the last time I caught a cold. And it's because, if you eat nutrient dense foods, your body just is stronger, and, food's not the only thing. Movement's very important. We have sedentary lifestyles, so people are getting sick because they sit too much also, right? So, food, movement, and positive relationships. And that's really the key to health, as at least I see it.
It's incredibly powerful stuff, anything where people have tried regenerative agriculture and it's actually been witnessed, the transformation on the land. And then, as you've just described, the transformation to your body. If you can actually notice a difference to your physical health, there's less suffering, there's less ailments. That sort of speaks for itself. And I think that you're absolutely right. You have described to us some very enormous, challenging to get your head around problems. But also, you've touched on what feels like a very, very hopeful solution, in that we have the knowledge, people are regenerating, people are producing food that is restoring lands, has got a higher nutrient output. It is possible. And really, I suppose that the answer then lies in the farmers being inspired and motivated and also supported by educated consumers. And this all kind of ties in together to really that bottom-up picture, rather than having a centralized system, having change come from the powers above us all. We kind of are the change,
Yeah.
if we can
Yeah.
keep collaborating and keep communicating.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It has to be from the grassroots, the ground up. Every individual needs to really think about this and think about what they need to do to improve their own health and their own life. And by that simple act of doing that, you improve the world. And actually, it's not a simple act. There's a lot of thought that needs to go into it, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's on the one hand, there's something beautifully simple about it, but yeah, that any change, particularly to our habits and our routines, it's much more challenging to do it than to say it. So any steps that we take are obviously very significant. And I think out of all of this, we've talked about complexity, but the simple relationship between a farm producing beautiful food and a consumer going to the gate and buying that food directly, this really short supply chain, can go a very long way to avoiding all of the challenges that we've talked about here. But it isn't practical, particularly for people producing grains. You could do that for your veg boxes, but your grain producers aren't going to have people come and buy it in the same way. So I think what you've created through Farmer Direct Organic, it takes that concept of the relationship between the consumer and the farmer, building that closer together, but on a scale that actually works across the board for all the products that we eat, the grains and everything as well. I would love if you could help us to understand your journey with this business, the model of the business, and how it's redefining the relationships between the consumers, the producers, and the retailers and the distributors in between.
Yes, this is really interesting. It started all the way back. Well, if I go way back, 1994, 95, in Vancouver, Canada. I had a very good friend of mine that got arrested for blockading a logging road. It's an interesting story. It's a place called the Ilaho Valley, about 3 hours north of Vancouver. This absolutely beautiful old growth watershed. It's like if people have pictures of Canada, especially British Columbia, and you see these just amazing rivers and trees and whatnot. So The good news is she spent time in jail, but they actually they won. And what the winning was the activists and the indigenous population there, forestry company, and the government got together and decided to save that watershed. And instead of clear cutting it, doing selective logging, um, you know, with the permission of the local indigenous group there. So that was good. But while this was going on, a friend of mine said to me that, and most of the forestry in British Columbia, a lot of it is pulp and paper. And so a friend of mine said, you can make paper out of hemp. I'm like, oh, wow. So I just went down that rabbit hole. I figured out that I didn't have the $150 million to build a hemp pulp and paper mill. There's technological issues, this and that. But what I did come across was a bunch of organic farmers and a group that was lobbying the federal government to legalize industrial hemp in Canada. I became part of that group. We put on trade shows and had a trade journal focusing on industrial hemp. We separated the issues between cannabis and industrial hemp. So we are only about industrial hemp, not cannabis. After 2 years of that, the government in Canada said, hey, there's actually a hemp industry here. So we'll legalize industrial hemp in 1998. So that's when I started my food journey, like my food journey in business. About 1995, I became an organic consumer to fix some health issues that I had. So I started eating organic food. So in 1998, government legalizes it. Some of the farmers that were part of that whole movement, I contracted them to grow some organic hemp seed for me. So they grew organic hemp seed. In 1999, I launched an organic hemp seed food brand. And I moved to Saskatchewan in May of 2000. I sold that brand in 2001. But three of the farmers that we had purchased organic hemp seed from said that, we grow lentils, wheat, beans, things like that. Can you market our other crops for us? And I said to them, if you form a cooperative, I'll manage your sales, marketing, and logistics for you. And so they formed cooperative, Farmer Direct Cooperative, and that was formed in 2002. And so when we formed it, I realized that there wasn't much transparency for farmers about pricing. So there'd be all these meetings across the prairies, the local organic chapters. So organic farmers, not all of them, but a lot of them are formed in chapters across the various regions on the prairies. They have meetings. They invite buyers to these meetings. And out of these meetings, none of the buyers would share their pricing. So we started sharing pricing and saying, okay, this is what the pricing we're offering. So price transparency to the farmers. What started happening is that forced all the other companies to start sharing prices, because we are the only ones sharing prices. And the farmer's like, well, what's your price? Company X, company Y, company Z. And so it started a tradition of those companies starting to share pricing with farmers. So that was the first step, right? Price transparency. What we were trying to get around with that is that I don't think really good farmers should be penalized because they're not good marketers. So that's, it's kind of, I'm going to say that again so it kind of sinks in. We don't think good farmers should be penalized because they're bad marketers. Okay, like what do we want our farmers to do? We want them to be the best at growing nutrient-dense food. Don't necessarily want them to have to be the greatest marketers in the world and make sure they're getting a good market price and they're not getting ripped off and stuff like that. So through the price transparency, the really good farmers weren't leaving any money off the table because they knew what all the companies were charging, right, or were paying them. So so that was 2002. We were running the co-op until about 2007, 2008, 2009 when the financial crisis hit. I'm assuming it happened in the UK. I'm not too sure, but we had this huge mortgage crash in mostly the US, and it affected Canada. And so the commodity markets just overnight just crashed. So prices crashed, demand just was erased. And so we looked at, and the co-op was in a lot of trouble, put us into a bunch of debt because of that. And so we figured out, we decided that, well, what are we going to do? We need to find higher margin markets that are more stable. So we decided to come up with a Farmer Direct Organic brand. And so when we came up with the Farmer Direct Organic brand in 2011, we're like, okay, well, what's our attributes? Like, what are we doing here? What's our consumer facing message? So our consumer facing message was, or 100% organic, because by that time, there's a lot of the companies were doing things like, we have an organic SKU here, but we have a natural SKU over here. And natural doesn't mean anything. So what it really was companies purchasing conventional food, because of course it's a lot cheaper than organic grain, putting it in bags and saying, hey, it's natural. Didn't mean anything. It was still grown with the same synthetic fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides. And so as an organic consumer, it kind of offended me. And that's why I should mention too, when Farmer Direct was formed, it was formed as a relationship between an organic consumer and organic family farm. So like right there, that relationship was forefront, and it affected how the co-op marketed themselves and conducted business. And so I said to the farmers that, okay, we have to go out strong, we have to be consumer facing, we have to be 100% organic. We're not going to dilute our brand, and it's 100% farmer owned. So that's really strong too. And then a third thing that we did, because as an organic consumer, I was always kind of a little concerned about this. I was like, okay, our food's organic, but is it fair? And why isn't it fair? And by that time, there's a lot of organic fair trade products coming up from the global south, bananas, coffees, whatnot. And I'm like, well, if you have fair trade and organic bananas, why can't we have organic and fair trade lentils? So we went out and we found a really good group called the Agricultural Justice Project. And the Agricultural Justice Project had created a domestic, so a North American-based, Canada and the U.S. Standard for fairness in agriculture. Is a really strong standard. And one of the reasons is a really strong standard because the Agricultural Justice Project was founded and controlled by farmers and farm workers. Okay, as opposed to some of these other fair trade organizations, which are more corporate, or there's limited farmer and farm worker representations on their board. It's more about kind of making fair trade ingredients affordable for corporations. So that's a whole other podcast. So we came out with a brand that was 100% farmer owned, 100% organic, and 100% domestic fair trade. And we called that the Fair Deal. So we entered in the marketplace in 2011. So about 2 years later, Whole Foods Market came knocking. And they said, we really love what you guys are doing. And at that time, and still today, we were the only brand in the marketplace to have those attributes. There was some 100% organic and 100% farmer-owned co-ops, but they weren't domestic fair trade. And we thought that, great, Whole Foods, sure, we'll sell a few pallet loads a month to them. And it turned into 5 to 7 truckloads of business a month. So it totally turned the co-op's fortunes around, put us into a profitable position. And that's a really good example in a story of like where doing good is good business. And I should go back a little bit in that story and say that, around 2011, when we decided to do this, we had no money. The co-op was broke, about $1 million in debt. We had no money to develop packaging. We had no money to develop, brand new products or whatnot that consumers would gravitate towards. But we figured that, well, what can we do? Well, we can take, our truckloads of lentils and we can break them down into 25-pound bags, palletize them, and then sell them to retailers for their bulk bins. And so that really took off. Then Whole Foods Market went through 5 to 7 truckloads a month of 25-pound bags for their bulk bins. So, so that's, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's essentially the story of like how Farmer Direct got started.
Thank you. I think it's a fantastic sense here of the need for this kind of I'm reluctant to call you a middleman because it has so many negative associations, but you're kind of an advocate for the farmer, and you are providing them with what are essentially tasks that are so integral to the success of their business that they simply don't have the time to do on their own. Yeah. So you're representing them with the like you've done the marketing, you're building the connections, you're identifying what the customer wants and what really matters to people with these various standards that you're highlighting. But you're also getting them through a financial crisis and all of these things. I think it just goes to show the pressure that can be on a farmer's shoulders. It really isn't easy. It's not just a case of grow and sell and thrive. There's all of this packaged into it. So I think that what you've sort of shown in your story there is the role that really didn't exist prior to this, that advocates as well as connects to the consumer that really wants those organic products, that really wants the best. And I think also what was interesting is the solution that really worked with the Whole Food stores. It was kind of almost an accident that you have created the no packaging, the bulk bags, because of a funding shortage. And I think that's lovely, because sometimes that is exactly the way we stumble across good ideas. And so that relationship then, would you say that the difference in what you're offering to the farmer is a more direct route to selling, essentially, in those bigger stores?
Yeah, essentially, and I was selling for them. So, I did something which wasn't prudent, I'd say, and that was, I started an organization that I had no ownership stake in. It was 100% farmer owned. So all that profit and all the decision making, was with the farmers and their board. The problem with that was that, if there's no problem with that, if it's developed, again, I'm a consumer, so I came in from the outside to work with the farmers. And because I didn't have any ownership stake, by 2016, the farmers wanted to go, well, half the farmers wanted to go in a different direction. I should set this up a bit more. Okay, so, and what you're saying too about grain is absolutely correct. These farms are large in relation to, say, farms in England that have livestock, vegetables, that can have a way more direct relationship with the consumer. We're selling grain to Sarasota, Florida. Our farmers are in, Kamsack, Saskatchewan. And so, you're growing grain on large acres. You can't really sell to individual consumers. It doesn't work. It's not enough volume to to make it worth it. So so I started the organization. It was 100% farmer owned, so it was theirs. We were doing really well with Whole Foods Market. The farmers were pressuring me to sell more commodity sales, full truckloads to food manufacturers, rail cars of wheat to millers. And I said to them that, we can do that. We can take the profits from the retail and we can put into infrastructure so that we can say, collect various lots of wheat, blend them to specific standard, and then move them to the flour mill. We didn't have any of that infrastructure, but the farmers still kept pushing. And I was like, it's just not realistic, you guys. We can't do this. Let's focus on where we're making money. So in 2016, co-op was doing great. We had money in the bank, but me and the board, we had different philosophies of where the co-op should go. Again, I had no ownership stake. So I created something which had no ownership stake in. So that's, it's a whole different kind of story or situation, which is kind of interesting. I probably wouldn't have changed anything, but I still don't necessarily, if you do that, if you're starting a nonprofit, whatever it is, you just have to understand that there will be a day and time, especially when you're successful, that people are going to want to take over that vision. And if you have no ownership in it, well, you just have to let them, because it just is what it is. So in 2016, I left the co-op. They hired a general manager from the conventional industry that moved a lot of commodities. Problem was, he didn't understand organic. The retail business he didn't understand. So by 2018, they had lost a lot of business. The co-op was insolvent again. So they came to me and they asked me if I'd purchase back the brand, but still buy their grain from them. And that's when Farmer Direct Organic Foods was formed. So in 2018, I bought the brand back from the farmers. And so this time, though, we're like, okay, well, it's not farmer owned anymore. So what's our consumer facing attributes? Like, who are we? And so at that time, being about 15 years since the concept of traceability got introduced into food, it was all their age. People were like, yeah, traceability. Problem was, when the companies really looked into it and looked into their industrial supply chains, or for example, like say rolled oats, oatmeal, they bring the oats into the plant, they put all the oats from all the farms in one big bin, and then they start processing it. Well, you can't have traceability if you do that. So they realized that traceability is a great concept, but in practice it doesn't work. So I was like, with our supply chains, we can do that. We can do traceability back to the family farm. So we introduced Farmer Direct Organic Foods with consumer-facing attributes of we're 100% organic, 100% traceable back to the family farm. And then the third one is pesticide testing. So we also test all our food for pesticide residues to make sure they're actually organic. And why are we doing this? Okay, so the reason we're doing this because since 2002 up until now, there's been an incredible amount of organic fraud. I think for organic consumers that are educated about this, they're seeing that. And in North America, a lot of it was because just lax enforcement by the USDA. They since started to change the rules, which is really great, which will make fraud a lot harder. But in the meantime, as a company, we felt we had an obligation to really assure organic integrity of the products that our consumers are eating. And so what does that mean? Does that mean that all the food is zero pesticide residues? No, that's not what it means. It means that all the food has if they have pesticide residue, that pesticide residue is under certain parts per billion. And we know when it's direct application versus drift from their neighbor. And this is another thing too for organic consumers to understand, I'd say even embrace, is that organic farmers are farming next to these large conventional farms that are spraying chemicals and whatnot, and there's literally nothing that they can do, okay, other than talk to their neighbors, tell them that they're organic, ask their neighbors not to spray on windy days. There's certain pesticide residue mitigation techniques they can use or strategies. But the bottom line is it's pretty obvious when a food is marketed as organic, but it's not organic, and that's based on the pesticide residue levels. If the level's too high, it's conventional food. If you have a little bit of residue in it, then it's conventional. Most of the grain that we bring in from our farmers doesn't test at all for residue, so that's great. And people really need to understand too that it's everywhere. Okay, they did a number of studies, for example, about Roundup, glyphosate. It's in everyone's urine, or almost everyone's urine. It's in the breast milk of mothers. Right? They did a study in Quebec, looked at pesticide residues in breast milk. It's like 95% of the people had pesticide residues in their breast milk. If that doesn't scare you, it should. And I think that's part of the transition away from the chemicals, is when people really start to realize how much these chemicals are pervasive in the environment and in our bodies. And there's few strategies to get rid of that. And one is to, eat an organic diet. But the other is to move away from agricultural chemicals and, move away from them and start farming regenerative organic systems. So we launched in 2018, and again, the marketplace was very receptive to that. They're like, this is great, and I think we're the only brand that has those attributes. And since then, we've added a few more things. We're a plastic neutral certified by Repurpose Global. Is again cascade of positive effects when people make these changes and really commit to organics and what I feel is doing the right thing.
Yeah, there's so much that you've highlighted within that. And overall, the feeling of the amount of thought that has to go into supply chains. We can't, as a consumer, see everything, every
Yeah.
step that goes in. So that level of transparency is so admirable and so desirable for us to know that actually we aren't causing harm with the choices that we make. It's a big thing. I think also going back to the chemicals in the food, the very significant impact on human health. The detriment to human health from those chemicals is alarming and hugely motivating. So that can in fact be a good thing. But I think the challenge of all of this is from the purchaser's point of view, there's such fatigue. There's such a difficulty in all of the greenwashing that we come across. And to add to that, this idea of organic fraud, that we can't simply trust the labels on the shelf. I think it's another layer of consideration. It opens another door. It's wonderful that you're taking steps to support that and to provide a solution within that. What do you think the future for organic farming looks like in terms of building these connections and the relationship with the consumer?
I think consumers are getting more and more frustrated um, with these labels that mean nothing. So they're going to gravitate towards companies that have transparency. So I think we're going to see more and more transparency in the industry. Again, though, consumers need to be vigilant. I like to give the example of natural food. Consumers just assumed that, natural food was better. It doesn't mean anything. It's, in regards to grain, when you see natural on the label, it's just conventional food put into a box with nice marketing. So you have to be a bit vigilant, have to educate yourself, actually read up about things, support companies that are doing things like ours, like Traceability. And I think in countries like England, for example, you just have an amazing opportunity to um, build your organic farm base because it's so close to major population centers that you're and your climate in England with amazing grasses, very mild. You could have a full rotational grazing system just on grass. You don't need to feed your cattle grain. I see places like England because of the environment there, consumers could really push for those changes. And one change which would be so much healthier for the environment and consumers is just that. Get ruminants off of grain. Stop feeding ruminants grain. What I mean by that is stop putting them in feedlots and stuffing them full of grain so they fatten them for over 3 months time, and really demand that grass finished product. Okay, because you have an abundance of grass in England. So just put them on grass. You put them on grass. Of course, their manure replenishes the fields. You rotationally graze them with other livestock, pigs, chickens, sheep, whatnot. The opportunity in England to produce a tremendous amount of food on the same amount of land because you're rotationally grazing properly with multi-species is tremendous. And that's another myth too I'd like to just talk about briefly. This whole myth that organic agriculture yields less. When you really start to do it properly, you are going to raise more pounds of meat on the same amount of acres because the land is being so replenished. People are very confused about this too. There's certain movements that are going, through the world. For example, veganism, okay, where people say we have to get off meat because, the way we produce meat or the meat production is killing the planet, it's killing the soil. And we say in the industry, it's not about the cow, it's about the how. How are you raising your livestock? Because if you raise them improperly, absolutely correct. People shouldn't eat meat. They should go on veganism. Okay. But if you raise your livestock properly, that is the single best way to build soil. The single best way to sequester or get that carbon back in the soil carbon loop. Single best way is proper raising of livestock. So, it's so where do I see, organics in the future of regenerative agriculture? I see livestock being a huge part of it. I see people changing their purchasing habits to support farmers that are rotationally grazing properly. I see people purchasing more grains that are grown regeneratively for a number of different reasons. One, higher micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, and two, less or non-existent pesticide residues. So as consumers get more and more educated about these issues, they will gravitate towards healthier food. Another thing about that too is it just tastes better. It just tastes better. My personal feeling is there is no comparison between a properly raised and aged grass-fed steak versus a corn-fed steak, which I feel tastes like garbage. Like, just straight up, I'll tell you that right now. The corn-fed steak and the feedlots, to my palate, taste like garbage. So, and so I don't buy that anymore, right? Always go for the grass finished because it just tastes way better.
Thank you. There's so much really valuable information in there. And I think it goes to mirror something that you said very, very clearly towards the start, that on the one side, we have this cascade of problems, and on the other hand, a cascade of solutions. And it's a really fantastic sort of insights that you've brought to us. I know also that over the last year, you've started your own small farm, if you like, your own horticultural project, which we don't have time to discuss with you today, which is a shame, but I think it would be fantastic to learn more about that maybe another time. But I think it really underlines and goes to show the answer that you would have to this, the idea of building that soil and working in this mixed way. It says a lot about how to produce quality food. So thank you so much for your time today. And is there a way that is best for people to learn more and connect with you?
You go to fdorganic.com, so farmerdirectorganic.com. You can reach out to me. If people are interested in actually reaching out to me directly, my email is jason@fdorganic.com. Especially if there's farmers out there who are like, hey, tell me more, what, do you have any resources, and consumers too, just have questions. I'm happy to talk to anyone.
Fantastic. That's really generous of you. Thank you so much and best of luck with everything.
Right on. Thank you, Helen. It's a pleasure.
And thank you for listening to this episode of We Are Carbon. You can find links in the description to explore more from Jason and Farmer Direct Organic. And alongside, there's info to help you learn more with We Are Carbon. There are many conversations that we've had now, and even a new format with animations to help us digest some of the big concepts. I'll highlight a few bits for you so you can get a feel for all the formats. Don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date. And let's keep figuring this all out together.